Welcome and thank you everyone for attending today's urgent Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. We are having to make this decision, call the decision of this meeting around the announcement to the John Lewis building. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Councillor Terry Fox. I'm the leader of the council and also chair of this committee. The meeting today is open to the public, except for Appendix 6, which is, contains legal advice for members of the council. I am aware that we will be taking questions on that and we will have to exclude the press and public from that item, but we will be taking questions originally on the public part of the disclosure in the papers that are on the website. We have received one question from the member of public, who I'll introduce in a moment after I've asked members of the committee to introduce themselves and the officers that are here today. So, as I've already said, I'm Councillor Terry Fox. I'm the leader of council and chair of this committee. I'll go to Joe Otten. Joe, can you just introduce yourselves, mate, please?
Hi, Councillor Joe Otten.
Thank you, Joe. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Richard Williams, member for Stannington.
Thank you, Richard. Martin.
Yeah, Councillor Martin Smith from Durham-Totley.
Thank you. Shafak.
Shafak Mohammed from Ecclesall.
Thank you, Julie.
Good morning, Julie Greycoat, Stocksbridge and Upton Ward.
Brian.
Councillor Brian Lodge, member for Burnley Ward.
Douglas.
Douglas Johnson, City Ward.
Thank you, Angela.
Councillor Angela Argento from Fulbroom Hill and Sharrowvale.
Thank you, and I'll just get the officers. Gillian.
Gillian Duckworth, Director of Legal and Governance.
Thank you, Kate.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
And Craig.
Craig Rogerson, Democratic Services.
Thanks, everybody. We've got a set of questions that we will take. Before I do, can I request that all mobile phones and other equipment are switched to silent mode as not to disturb the conduct of the meeting? There is no fire test planned for today. If there is an emergency evacuation, please take instructions from town hall staff, and the assembly point is Chew the Square. And everybody knows how to Chew the Square, especially with the sun shining. So anyway, we will crack on. Mr. Hughes, would you like to come and ask your questions, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So, I hope that this committee agrees that Sheffield's best chance of winning the confidence of investors and funders is to show a united front in pursuit of achievable goals. Hasty attempts to reverse new protections can only delay and deter. Raising the listing in Parliament is unlikely to have a happy outcome, as the Council's own application has resulted in the listing, and the Secretary of State's response may well refer to this. The statement to the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport recently made public could antagonise them when we need them the most. So the building is listed now and will remain so unless delisted, and this would be unwise to attempt. For Castle House, the review took 15 months and it failed. So instead, I'll ask this committee to firstly confirm that Historic England have been consulted to understand the nature and extent of acceptable change, then perhaps to convene a group of elected members, officers and other knowledgeable stakeholders such as Historic England, maybe the Sheffield Property Association, Sheffield Society of Architects and so on, to find a positive way forward on the opportunity provided by this national asset and how to make it deliver for Sheffield. Seek a meeting with the DDCMS, the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities, Arts Council England and others to explore potential support for a cultural use, such as the library-based Sheffield Story House, complementing the National Gallery of the North proposed for the Graves building. And finally, to prioritise adopting a strategic approach to culture and heritage in order to maximise the potential for central funding in these areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. And obviously the questions are now to the committee. The committee will be discussing this. I hope you will stay with us to listen to the discussions. and at the end of the meeting, the recommendations that are gone through. So hopefully, within that, we will answer those questions that you have quite rightly raised with us, and we'll take notice of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. If members have noted those points, and then obviously going through the meeting, if we miss anything, then I'm sure we'll get messages to you, Mr. Hughes. Can I have apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Mick Rooney and Paul Wood.
Thank you. We've done the exclusion of press and public and press, which will be on items 6. Declarations of interest. Is there any declarations of interest on this item? If not, thank you very much. We'll go straight into then the body of the report. The reason why we're here today is obviously the decision by the Secretary of State and Historic to list John Lewis, and obviously the committee has an opportunity to debate and discuss. Kate Joseph will be presenting due to the fact of the situation that we are still in the summer holidays, and we've got a number of officers who are on annual leave. Kate.
Thanks, Chair. So the purpose of the meeting, as Terry said, is to consider the implications and options following the designation by the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport of the former Cole Brothers store in Barker's Pool as a Grade 2 listed building. The paper sets out the context and background, including restating the importance to our city of Sheffield City Council's flagship development scheme, Heart of the City. As everybody's aware, in March 2021, John Lewis announced the closure of the Barker's Pool store, and Sheffield City Council has engaged in negotiations which culminated in JLP surrendering their lease. And in January of this year, the council took back the building, and since then, teams have been undertaking surveys which will inform removal of asbestos and preparing for redevelopment prior to marketing. In February 2022, in line with that work to prepare the site for redevelopment, we applied for a certificate of immunity from listing. This was a really important decision to provide certainty to potential developers. Historic England considered this application along with further research that they have conducted in the last 20 years and have now determined, and we were told of this on the 10th of August, that the former Cole Brothers store stands out as a rare surviving example of high modernism in department stores featuring innovative design from a leading firm of architects, and as a result the building has been listed as Grade 2. We're clear that this has triggered mixed views locally. There are some very supportive voices and there is also some controversy. What we've tried to do in this paper is step back and make sure that we're providing obviously advice and evidence on the key points that can be taken into consideration. In terms of the listing itself, the paper sets out in detail the key points that Historic England and the Secretary of State take into consideration and indeed do not when a listing decision is taken. As it sets out, the Council does have a right to request a review of the decision within 28 days, but that can only be done if there is evidence that the original decision has been made wrongly, for example, due to a factual error, or that there is significant evidence that has not been previously considered. We're not aware of any further evidence or discrepancies in the information that has been considered by Historic England. Further legal advice has been provided and that will be discussed and can be discussed in the closed session and is part of a closed annex. Obviously, as is clear from the paper, we're also clear that any decision to seek formal challenge will risk delay. Moving to redevelopment of the site, the paper explains what listing means and does point out that listing doesn't mean that the building cannot be altered or indeed parts potentially demolished. However, there will have to be obviously a very strong justification for that given the listing. And such proposals to make alterations would need to be considered by the planning authority and will require listed building consent. It's also worth making the point there that we have, and the paper sets out a number of examples of innovative reuse of such buildings in Sheffield and elsewhere. At para 128 and 129, we outline the process currently underway to select a new developer. So just to reiterate that, in May the building was marketed, we received expressions of interest in July, and the second stage of the process is anticipated to take place over the autumn. 16 expressions of interest were received in that first stage, and the majority of those included retention of most of the building. We made it clear that we had submitted a request for certificate of immunity, and developers welcomed that for the certainty it would provide. When we were informed of the listing decision, all bidders were notified by the agents that the building has been listed, and following discussions with our agent CBRE, a number of those developers have indicated that they remain very keen to progress their proposals. The council is therefore confident that it can secure a private sector developer who will be able to bring forward a good scheme for reuse of the building from those who expressed an interest. Listing will of course affect how developers consider the site, but it is too early to understand the financial implications of that. The recommendations set out at page 2 include proposals to continue the process underway in terms of marketing the site and discussing with developers, to prepare with this committee selection criteria to ensure that the use of the site sits with the importance that that site has for the city and meets our requirements, to produce a detailed planning brief, and to approach Historic England, Government and the MCA to explore the potential for funding support in the event that that is needed once we have more confirmation of the potential uses of the site. The report further recommends that no further action is taken in formally disputing the listing. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm not going to open to questions and comments from colleagues in the room. Can I ask if we that we stick to the published paper first, and then when we move into legal advice and restricted, then I will ask for the removal of press and public. Okay, thanks a lot. I've got Douglas, then Angela.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say that I find this a very useful report. It's taken some careful consideration, and so I'm happy to go broadly with the recommendations then. I think it's become clear that the listing of the building is not a barrier to redevelopment, and we've got that very clearly in this report, that the developers who were interested with evidently credible proposals have not run a mile. They are still keen, I think is the word. And that's actually really promising for the redevelopment of the city centre. So, as we all know, the question of whether it should be listed, whether it should have been built in the first place, or whether it should be demolished are things that Sheffielders will continue to argue about, and that's quite right. But the fact is, it has been listed, and we are there, and that's the question now, is how developers can build on that. So actually this is very promising once we take out this bit of contention. We can support this. We've got a slight modification which we'll come back to on the amendments, but it's a very minor one, just to reflect the need for central government and associated bodies to put some resource into this. But again, just reflecting on the fact that actually the listing building recognising the city's heritage in all its sort of curious forms can be a real positive driver for regeneration. So I'll just say that at this point. For me, I'll just say that actually all the relevant information is contained in the open public report. The closed report doesn't add any detail that I need to discuss from my point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas. Angela?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, echoing Douglas' words, and I agree with him totally. And also, Mr. Hughes, thank you very much for bringing your viewpoint here. I think in terms of, we can discuss whether we like the building or not like the building. Until the end of time, we will never all agree, because it's a matter of kind of personal preference. I agree with Douglas. It's listed, that it doesn't look like we can do anything about that, and actually it might be a positive thing rather than a negative thing. And I agree with Mr. Hughes, we need to show a united sort of front rather than argue about it, and just get on with the redevelopment and just go for it, really.
Thank you, Angela. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a slightly different view. So personally, I find the listing decision surprising and disappointing. And I don't, again, personally, I don't think it can be described as positive. Just to pick up something that Councillor Johnson said about it not limiting the redevelopment opportunities. I mean, within the public side of it, 1.29, clearly it does limit the options for redevelopment. Well, we can argue whether that's whether they were good options or not, but let's be honest, it does. And so, linked to that, I have a question. So, the council has a number of other. I mean, we can debate the John Lewis situation, but we've got a number of other key projects in development. So we've got Fargate, High Street, and Castlegate. I welcome the views as to what the what do we do now to make sure we're not hit by another situation like this, another unforeseen listing in any of those projects. We can debate the impact of this one and what we need to do, but to have more than one, I think, would be unfortunate. So I just want to put that out there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I'll bring Ruth in. Ruth, if you can just introduce yourself as why you're here and the question you're taking. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruth Masood. I work in regeneration, and I'm here in lieu of Tommy Whitaker, Head of Property. So, sorry, could you just ask me the question again?
I'll rephrase it. So what lessons can we learn from this particular situation for the other active redevelopment projects we've got in the city? So the changes to Fargate, High Street and Castlegate. Thank you.
There's quite a few of the buildings on Fargate have already been listed and have heritage protection. Similarly on High Street, it's very difficult to predict that this wouldn't happen again in the future. So I actually don't know how we could, the only assurity that you could give would be if there were any that you assessed to put in more certificates of immunity would really be the only way forward. We've got conservation areas which give a level of protection already, and we've got quite a lot of heritage protection. They've got quite a lot of listed buildings elsewhere. So we'd need to examine specific buildings and start to evaluate those. Have you got any in mind that you'd be concerned about, particularly that we could investigate for you?
I have no specific buildings in mind. It's just, a suggestion. This has caught the council completely off guard. We were all surprised by it. I guess it behoves us, I would suggest, to just double check that in the other plans we've got elsewhere in the city,
yes, I think
we're minimising the risk of being surprised again.
I suppose in Fargate there aren't any plans to demolish any buildings at the minute, as far as I'm aware. Castlegate, we've already demolished the market, so that's removed that risk. Where was the other area you referred to? The heart of the city, we've retained quite a large amount of those, and some of those were listed buildings that the developers have worked with.
Yeah, it was Fargate, High Street and Castlegate. So, and I accept your answer, but the point I'm making is
we can't give any certainty at the minute, and I think that's, but if there's any particular buildings that we were concerned about, we'd bring it back to you if we thought there was a risk of listing.
Thanks, Ruth. I'll bring Kate in. Kate.
Yeah, just to add to Ruth's points, I think, Martin, there's the very particular lesson from this listing has been the understanding that we now have that Historic England have done a fairly extensive piece of work and research around department stores and modernist architecture, and so I think there's probably a strategic question about for the team to just reflect on what that might mean for buildings in the city, as you say. I think I'd also say, and Kate Martin, our Exec Director of City Futures, is on taking well-deserved leave at the moment as well. But I know that one of her her priorities is to make sure that we as a council have a really strong strategic relationship with Historic England, that we're regularly meeting with them, that we're discussing issues arising, and we're up to speed with the latest developments from them. And I think that's one of the key ways that we can ensure we are, you know, as Ruth says, surprises will happen, but that we are on the front foot in terms of our relationship. I hope that's reassuring.
Thanks, Kate. Shafak and Joe.
Yeah, I've got a couple, probably three questions. One probably to Terry, but I think it's 1.5. It talks about the previous attempts to list this building in 2001, and obviously it was turned down, and we got a certificate of immunity for 5 years. I can't remember exactly when, but a few years back, when John Lewis decided not to progress with the original Seven Stones, and it went to just for refurb and redevelopment of the site itself. Can I just ask, did officers consider seeking a certificate at that point? And if not, why not?
Can you answer that, Ruth? Is that?
Sorry, I can't answer that question
Fine.
at the moment as to why that historically happened.
If not, Ruth, we'll get the answer for Shafak. I think that there may be others in the room.
So it's an important one.
It still wouldn't have prevented this occurring because it would have lasted for 5 years. So after 2007, if we'd reapplied.
Yeah, but the recent, I think that's, I'll need to check. I mean, I look forward to getting a response from the officers, but the redevelopment, and particularly at the point when Sheffield City Council was going to put money into refurb, that wasn't less than 5 years, unless time flies. I just, you know, it's a point in question that there was an opportunity there that may well have been missed.
Would you like us to follow that up?
Yeah, please follow that up.
So,
thank you.
sorry, could you just repeat the question again and I'll find out?
The question was when John Lewis decided not to move into a new site, i.e. demolish the current site and move into what was then Seven Stones, eventually they decided to come into partnership with Sheffield when they wanted to surrender the lease and all that sort of stuff, yeah?
Yeah.
And at which point we said that we'll refurb. So the question is, did we consider seeking a certificate of immunity from listings at that point? And if not, why not?
Thanks for that. Jill, can you shed light on this?
I don't know the detailed response to this, and I think we can still provide you with a detailed response. But at the time, the property was on a long lease to John Lewis, so therefore it wouldn't have been the council's property to deal with at the time. So part of the reasoning may have been that it was John Lewis's decision as to how they dealt with that property, and therefore it's not something that the council necessarily would have considered. But of course we can get you a more detailed response if we've got that corporate memory.
My understanding was they were surrendering that lease for a different one. So, yeah, there was a discussion they were having with us about the future of that building.
Okay, well, I'm not aware of that.
Right, okay. Chair, this is to you, I suspect, rather than the officers. What are you? 1.17, I think. Your letter, or the bits of your letter, in particular, I mean, to challenge Councillor Johnson's point here, the second bullet point in your letter that's been paraphrased in his report is that risk that the decision limits options for future of the site. So I really can't see how that stacks up with what Councillor Johnson is saying. Either the leader's wrong or Councillor Johnson's wrong. I don't know which one. But clearly in your letter, you also ask the Secretary of State to intervene and pause the listing. So us making a decision today, doesn't that kind of basically null and void your letter, Chair? Because the Secretary of State will be saying, well, you've already decided, Councillor Fox, one way or the other, particularly if you go with Councillor Johnson's opinion today.
Thanks, Councillor Schwab. My letter was taken on board asking for a pause, was that in my deliberations, 28 days with a number of officers off through August, etc., was not enough time. And you will see in the report, which I will be asking questions later in the restricted of 4.21 is that we've got what are those financial implications on the council. And part of that was I didn't think in 28 days, bearing in mind, I think we was down to 21 when I written the letter, that we had sufficient time to get to that point, as you say, and we've heard from officers, and in the report it says that there are a number of developers still in. So I think trying to play semantics with me and Councillor Johnson really doesn't really matter. I think what we're saying is there's opportunities out there. What I was asking was for some time for us all to be able to get over the announcement that just it is. And my understanding was, certainly Councillor Julie Cook and Councillor Masood, it was late at night when they was made aware of this announcement. And the council had made the view of the certificate of immunity. So for this, to get this, so that's why I was asking the Secretary of State just to pause, let us have time to think. And I think in Mr. Hughes' question, he's talking about the opportunities as this will bring. What we wasn't aware at that moment in time was what the developers, and we've got to go through the process within this, so we'll see what opportunities, but what I didn't want was the knee-jerk reaction to take place in regards of what the opportunities are. But I'm quite clear, and I said it in the letter, this shouldn't cost the council a penny. There may be other funding out there, and I'm sure we'll take that up later, but this, I'm quite clear that this announcement, this listing, and I think we all agree on that, that this shouldn't now impact on the residents of Sheffield. So I hope that clarifies that, Councillor Ahmed.
The last point, Chair, is actually on the point you've just kind of touched on, 4.2.1. Just to remind colleagues, the point is it's too early to assess the detailed financial impact as a result of listing the building. But the question to the officers is that given our past experience of listing of buildings, the likelihood is this is going to incur costs, unless you tell me that previous listings have led to reduction in costs. Are you able to share what those increased costs were previously? I mean, the obvious one is Park Hill.
Thanks, Al.
You know, and particularly cost of keeping secure that building or that
It's a much larger building, but you want me to try and find out how much extra costs were incurred?
Yeah, because if you read further down in your in the thing, it talks
you're going to
about.
have to try and compare apples with pears, though, because obviously Park Hill's one of the largest listed buildings in Europe. This one's quite small, but we'd have to look at a percentage. So a percentage of cost that's been added because of its listing.
Yeah.
Chair, I think we're straying into some of the next questions.
So
maybe this is probably more for later on, do you think, in the
Well,
close
there is
session?
a conservation deficit is what I think you're referring to. So there is a gap and an added cost when redeveloping a listed building. As a percentage, I think it would differ depending on the building, the individual building, and what costs were incurred depending on the condition of it.
Colleagues,
So,
can we we'll talk about the anyway, deficit in the next part, if that's okay. But I think the point's well made.
Can I just flag it now and then, in case, because obviously in there you also talk about incurring holding costs. So can I flag that with you now? And if you're not able to give me the answer because of the commercial sensitivities of it, it's a question I'd like you to return once the cameras are turned off.
Just to clarify that point, sorry, Councillor Mohammed. So the holding cost point is making the point that were the decision to be reviewed and there to be a delay, that there would be costs to securing the building. That's a different point.
Yes, and I had it as two different points. It's just, you know, I'd like to know what that holding cost would be. Okay. Ideally in public, but if not in private at least, before we can make a decision. And the final point, just in response to Councillor Johnson, I don't share your enthusiasm for the listings. I definitely wouldn't class it as a fantastic news, I'll tell you that right now. And I'm not sure how many people in the city would say that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Shafak. I've got Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question was actually going to be a little bit similar to Councillor Mohammed, to 117, 118. I'm confused and unclear, I suppose, what the position of this council on the listing is, given your letter, given Councillor Iqbal's statement that he thought it was an excellent decision. If it's for this committee to decide, I would like us to decide that we're not happy with it. We think it was a mistake. And if we were to write to the Secretary of State, how do I put this? I mean, my understanding of the process is that all the issues you ask the Secretary of State to consider are issues that she can't consider legally in terms of making a decision on the listing of a building. And that what we should have done, perhaps, danger of being kept in hindsight, before the decision was made, because that's the best time to write these letters, isn't it? Given that we had applied for a certificate of immunity, would have been to write and say, well, look, it's a concrete box. Give weight to the fact that it's a concrete box over the fact that it has some nice, there are some nice features, and I like the features. And I do like, I feel the pang of nostalgia going into there, because when it was open, because it was like department stores were when I was little. But that's not the big picture here. It is falling apart. That surely speaks to its quality. Have you given sufficient weight to the fact that it's a concrete box over it has nice features? Are you sure the lifts and escalators are original? Because we've heard people say they don't think they are actually original lifts and escalators. And there's a larger point. If you're going to argue the artistic merit of a building like this, the larger point is that artistic merit isn't just a list of criteria, is it? It's not just, the experts say this is a good piece of art. And in particular, the hyper-modern style, also, and a worse example or a better example, depending on your point of view, is the modernist brutalism of Park Hill. But the question is, up until about, 1910, 1920, there was a view that art ought to be beautiful. And since then, there has been a view that art is good for you, whether or not it's beautiful, and if it's ugly, it's still good for you and you ought to lump it. And that is a particular view, but it's a view that can be challenged. And if you're writing a letter to a Conservative minister, I submit it might be a decent try to say, well, look, we thought we had listing in order to protect traditional British things that speak to our identity, and not to protect, modernist brutalism that is there. Its artistic statement, if it has one, is a speech against our traditional British identity. Now, that's not my view. It's not how I'd put my view if I was trying to persuade myself. But if I was trying to persuade a Conservative minister, I might go down that line. So I'm not clear. That would be the position I would have taken if I'd written that letter. And instead, I'm not sure where we are, because we have a letter asking for a pause on grounds that can't be considered. We also have a recommendation before us that we don't pause, and we also have comments from Councillor Iqbal that it's a marvellous decision. And I would like some clarity, and I would recommend clarity along the lines that I've just argued.
Thank you, Councillor. So now I'll bring Jill in a moment. Regarding where the council is, that's the point of today's meeting with the recommendations at the front of this document. I was not personally consulted. I expressed my opinions, not like the rest of the Sheffielders, when we was asked about what the public opinion was. Again, you're quite right about some of the content of my letter is not asking in regarding of legal terms, and which obviously Jill will comment on. But it was my view of speaking up on behalf of Sheffielders regarding the situation with the financial situation, and also the very strict timelines on that. What, in regards of the situation about welcoming it, is we have now got, whether we like it or not at this moment in time, a decision, and that decision now is firm, so that people will have the confidence that they can go forward to work within that envelope. The issue is for this committee is to seek to get to those recommendations. Again, in that moment where we were, because we wasn't consulted, we did write previously, because that's why we put in the certificates of immunity. So we did write in, and we did put in all those elements that we think that they should be considered. Now, I'm not going to get in with yourselves, Councillor Orton, in the eye of the beholder and the critiques of art, because I really would lose that one, I'm sure I would. But what I would say in that respect is that we have responded, and I still don't think 28 days for a decision that was dropped on our toes is long enough for us to make that informed decision. But we have got certainty now, that's the issue, and for those people that work in that world, certainty is what they require. I'll bring Gillian regarding the guarantees, and it may be something that we discuss in the next part of this meeting. Jill.
Sorry, Chair, it wasn't me, it was Councillor Grocott that wanted to come in.
Sorry, Julie, do you want to come?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really agree with your comment, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I've grown up shopping in Cole Brothers, as my mum still calls it, and spent a lot of time in there, and they've had an awful lot of money over the years, as I think they have many and probably most Sheffielders. And I think, you know, everyone was disappointed and angry when John Lewis decided they were handing the keys back and shutting the store. And, you know, as a city council, that's something that we have got to now deal with and look at. And in all the time and all the years I've been going in John Lewis, nobody ever said to me, isn't this an awful building? Isn't this an ugly building? Who designed this pile of rubbish? Never heard that ever. As soon as the building closed, we all now have an opinion on the design, the look, the feel of the building. And in many ways, I think that's really good. And I think that's something that we should embrace. And it's something that now we have this decision, we should make the most of, because the advice we've been given is clear. So let's embrace it. Let's be optimistic, please, other side of the room. Let's be optimistic. Let's show people what great work we can do in Sheffield. I was told the other day we've got 1,200 listed buildings in this city. So, you know, that to me looks like a lot of buildings. That is some fantastic work. The heart of the city shows us the fantastic opportunities we've got in this city, the drive, the way forward, the vision we have got as a city. And I think what we need to do now is stop this bickering. We need to have a grown-up conversation, and we need to show everyone, including the people in Sheffield who are disappointed and upset, and the people in Sheffield who want this building knocking to the ground, that actually we have got the vision, we have got the foresight, and we have got the talent to do something really great with this building. We should be moving, in my opinion, this argument on, and we should be showing people what we can really do, not talking about how awful it is and how dreadful it is. I understand people have those views and opinions. I think we've all been through that. We will all live through that. But actually, we are where we are, and it's how do we turn this into an opportunity? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Julie. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think there's a bit of confusion that's coming out here, and Councillor Lawton, I think you're talking about artistic merit, when I think the listing is more about the architectural merit of the building. If you read the listing, it's talking about the architects involved and the measure. It's not necessarily looking at it and saying that is a square box. It's talking about the architectural merit of the listing. You know, we will all have our own views and opinions on what's architectural merit, but Historic England have taken that view and looked at things based on the partnership that designed it and some of the elements within there. I think there's also confusion around elements within the letter that was sent from you as leader of the council, because it's talking really about pausing and giving us a chance to consider it and consider what the financial implications of this are likely to be. Now, quite rightly, people have highlighted and said some developers may be put off, and there may be things in there. As co-chair of the finance subcommittee, I'm looking at this and thinking, you know, what's the impact on this for Sheffield? Are there likely to be additional costs that developers may incur that we've maybe passported back to Sheffield, and you know, capital receipts and things like that we're anticipating for the building may now not be materialised because of the need to put money into, because of dealing with some of the listing aspects. So it's right, that's our role as city councillors, to question these things. That's our duty. And surely, when something is dropped, and we've heard many, many times from members of the opposition groups about consultations that are conducted over holiday periods and timescales, then surely when they're putting 28 days out to us in the middle of August, when officers are on holiday, when leading members are on holiday, and when we're trying to get advice, surely it makes sense to pause so we can have a look and look at things there. I don't think there's any conflict in the letter in there, because it says, greatly appreciate your intervention before then, pausing the listing until further consideration of wider financial, economic and environmental implications, and how the decision will be publicly received. We've seen the response from people in Sheffield. We've seen the reaction and things within the media. Yes, it is. It's something that's central in there. We're just investing £450 million into the heart of the city. So clearly this will have an impact what's in there, and it's our duty to consider this. So I don't think there's anything wrong in asking them to pause it while we understand the implications. This report lays things out, and the closed appendix also lays out some of those considerations and responses to those. But at the time, we didn't have those. We had a limited time scale of 28 days to respond, and this was just asking to put a pause on it until we could get our thoughts and considerations together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. If there's no more questions on this part, is it on this part, Douglas? I want to move to the second part. Okay, I'll bring you in, and then if we can move to the second part of the meeting. Thanks, Douglas.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to make two brief points. One is, no one's yet mentioned the climate change issues, which of course you'll need to bring up. It's often said, isn't it, that the greenest building is the building that's already standing there. If that is a consequence of this, it's really interesting to see the heritage and the regeneration and the climate change issues all aligning there. And then secondly, there has been a bit of discussion about this letter that's been sent by the leader of the council to the Secretary of State, and possibly with the benefit of 7 days hindsight, it would have been better not to have sent that. It muddies the water, arguably. And there's an argument to say that it's slightly unclear in what capacity that's sent, now that we don't have a strong leader, an executive model of governance here. But the effect of this recommendation, if we adopt it today, is to draw a line under that and make it clear that we're not proposing to take formal action on the listing, and that will put that to bed. It won't ever put to bed the arguments about the merits or otherwise of the building, and both the Youth Council and Councillor Grocott have expressed some very passionate views there about it. So I think it's just worth drawing that line there. I completely agree with what Councillor Grocott says about moving forward, actually facing up to this as a really positive situation that we're in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to touch on that, the role of the leader, I'm not going to open up the debate on the AGM, but it's quite clear in the Constitution what my role is as leader, and I would think it would be remiss of me not to inform the Secretary of State of the feeling, and on behalf of the people of Sheffield, as one of their elected representatives, to put forward their concerns, and did mention about the situation with the climate change, etc., etc. So, and the environmental impact. So that's why I wrote the letter, and I'll continue wherever I'm being leader of the council to put the people of Sheffield first. Right. So if we move into the second part of that, and I'm going to ask Mr. Hughes to leave, and we will be shutting down, and we'll come back for the final recommendations and amendments. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Hughes. Shall we just take 2 minutes while we cut down? Thank you.